For this video, we're going to be discussing factoring trinomials, and this should be a review of Algebra 1. So, let's first talk about what's a trinomial. So, a trinomial is just an expression that has three terms, right? So, terms just being numbers separated by adding or subtracting. And we're going to specifically be talking about quadratic trinomials, meaning that the highest exponent will be 2. And we want to deal with, they're going to be in this form. So it's ax squared plus bx plus c. In order to do this the way that we're going to be doing it, they have to be in this order, with the x squared term first, then the x term, and then our constant. And trinomials can be factored into two binomials. And a binomial, if you don't know, a binomial takes the form of like bx plus c. So it's just a number or an expression that has two terms in it instead of three. And not all polynomials can be factored. The ones that can't are called prime polynomials. So what we're going to be trying to do is we're going to be trying to take something that looks like this, ax squared plus bx plus c, and we're going to be trying to take that and split it into two binomials that are going to be like, to use different letters like dx plus f and hx plus g. And these letters don't mean anything except for that they're numbers. So let's talk about how we're going to do this. All right, there are a lot of different ways to factor, and for this class we're going to be talking about factoring by grouping. All right, so this method works like this. Our first step is going to be to factor out any greatest common factor that our trinomial might have. Then we take our first two terms, right? We take the coefficient of our first term, a, and our last term, c, and we multiply them together. And what we're trying to do is find two numbers that multiply together to get that number, ac, and add to get b, our middle term. So, for example, if I, wanted to, let's say that our AC was 6 and our B was 7. So let's say I gave you this trinomial, x squared plus 7x plus 6. And I said I wanted you to factor this. All right, I would do, first off, there's a 1 here that we don't see. So I would go 1 times 6 is 6. And then down here I'd go 7. And then I'd want to think of two numbers that multiply together to get 6 and add together to get 7. So if you think about that for a second, what you're going to eventually come up to is that those two numbers are 6 and 1. 6 times 1 is 6, and 6 plus 1 is 7. And what you end up doing is you split, this is this step here, split this term into those two factors. So if I got 6 and 1 here, then this would be 6, and this would be 1. Then what we're going to do is we're going to group them, and basically grouping just means we group the first two and the last two. And then we take the greatest common factor out of each one of these two groups, and then we kind of just separate it into two separate binomials at the end. Now, as we walk through one full example, this will begin to make a lot more sense. So let's take a look at that. Let's start with example 1. So this says to factor x squared plus 5x plus 6. So the way I want to start this, I first want to look for any greatest common factor of these three things. So once again, if you don't remember, there's a 1 out here that we just don't see. So I've got 1x squared plus 5x plus 6. 1, 5, 6. Those don't have any sort of greatest common factor. So, don't have to do that step. Next, I want to multiply a, which is 1, times c, which is 6, and 1 times 6 is 6. Then down here goes 5. So, what I'm looking for is I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply to get 6 and add to get 5. So if I think about this, numbers that multiply to get 6. Okay, well 6 is 1 times 6, and it's 3 times 2. Well, if I think about this, 1 plus 6, that's 7, that doesn't work. But 3 plus 2, that's 5. So that does work. So my two numbers that I want to find are 3 and 2. So now I'm done with that step. Next, I want to split my middle term into those two factors. So what I'm going to do, this 5 is going to become 2x and 3x. And the rest of the terms just come down. So x squared and 6 just come down. All right, so now that I've split, now I want to group. So I just group the first two and the last two. Now I want to factor out the greatest common factor of each one of these two groups. So if I look here, x squared and 2x. Well, I can think there's a 1 out here. But 1 and 2, those don't really share anything. But x squared and 2x, those both share an x, so I'm going to bring an x out front. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide out this x from each one of these terms. So x squared divided by x is just x. 2x divided by x is just 2. So x squared plus 2x, that's x times x plus 2. Then I want to do the same thing over here, 3x and 6. Well, 3 and 6, their greatest common factor is positive 3, so I'm going to put a plus 3 here. And this has an x and this doesn't, so I can't take an x out. Now, once again, I'm going to divide each one of these two things by 3. 3x divided by 3 is just x. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. And the nice thing about factoring by grouping is that at this point, I can check and see if I'm doing this right. If I'm doing it right, what's inside of my parentheses here should be the same. In this case, they are. They're both x plus 2, so I know I'm doing it right. So now I've factored them out. And now this says factor out the common binomial, but really what that means is I just want to rewrite this thing into two binomials, and it's really easy. In the first one, just put what's inside your parentheses, x plus 2. And for the second binomial, just put in what's outside, x plus 3. And now I've taken this trinomial and turned it into two binomial factors. If I multiplied this thing out, I would end up back where I started. So this is the factored version. So let's do a few more examples. So here's example 2. I've got 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. So first step, I want to check for a greatest common factor. 2, 5, and 2. Well, 2 and 2, like those are both 2, so obviously I could factor out a 2 there. But because this 5 doesn't share that, I don't have a greatest common factor here, so I don't have to do that. Next, I want to multiply a and c. So my a term is 2, and my c term is also 2. So I've got 2 times 2 is 4. Then down here comes my b term, which is negative 5. All right, so what I'm trying to figure out is I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to negative 5. So if I think of my factors of 4, well, 4 is 4 times 1, and it's 2 times 2. Well, 4 plus 1 is 5. That doesn't work. And 2 plus 2, that's 4. That doesn't work. So how could I make this work? How could I find two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to negative 5? Well, what I really need to think about is negatives. If I make both of these negative, negative 4 and negative 1, negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4. My negatives cancel. And negative 4 times or plus negative 1 is negative 5. So those are my two numbers that I'm going to use, negative 4 and negative 1. So I've done this, I've done this. Now I need to split my middle term into these two factors. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to go, all right, split this negative 5 into negative 1x and negative 4x. And then I just bring down my other two terms, 2x squared and plus 2. All right, so now I've split it up. Now I'm going to group. I group my first two and my last two. And I need to factor out the greatest common factor. So 2 and negative 1, those don't share anything. X squared and x, those share an x. So my greatest common factor in my first two is x. If I factor that out, 2x squared divided by x, the 2 doesn't go anywhere, and x squared divided by x is just x. Negative 1x divided by x, the x's cancel each other out, and I'm just left with minus 1. Now over here, this is important, okay? Negative 4 and 2, okay? I think we can agree that 4 and 2 share a 2, but this 4 is negative. So the way this works is you always have to take the sign of that first number. So this should be minus 2. So my greatest common factor of these two is negative 2. Now if I divide these out, negative 4x divided by negative 2, negative 4 divided by negative 2, the negatives cancel, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. Nothing happens to the x. 2 divided by negative 2. Well, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and positive divided by a negative is a negative, so this becomes minus 1. Notice I can tell I'm doing this right because 2x minus 1 here and 2x minus 1 here. So I've done that, so now I just need to regroup. In my first set of parentheses, I put what's inside 2x minus 1. And in my second set of parentheses, I put what's on the outside, x minus 2. So once I've done that, I've now factored my quadratic trinomial here, 2x squared minus 5x plus 2 into 2x minus 1 times x minus 2. So this is my answer. All right, let's take a look at one more. Here's example number 3. So in example 3, first step, factor out any greatest common factor. Well, if I look at this, 6, 26, and 20, those are all even numbers. So I know that I can factor out a 2 right at the beginning. 6 divided by 2 is 3, x squared. 26 divided by 2 is plus 13x. And 20 divided by 2 is minus 10. Now, a really common mistake people make is they forget that they need to have this 2 on their answer. So one thing I recommend doing is taking that 2 and bringing it down to the end so that you don't forget it, and then you don't have to worry about it for the rest of solving this problem. All right, so now I've factored out my greatest common factor. Now I want to multiply a times c. So 3 times negative 10 gets me negative 30. And down here is 13. So now I want to find two numbers that multiply to get negative 30 and add to get 13. Now multiplying to get negative 30 tells me that one of my numbers has to be negative. So let's think of numbers that multiply to 30. I've got 30 and 1. I've got 15 and 2. I've got 10 and 3. And I've got 6 and 5. Those are my numbers that multiply to get 30. And then if I think negatives, one of them has to be negative. So let's just go through and see if I can find the one that adds up to 13. If I do negative 30 plus positive 1, that's negative 29. That doesn't work. If I do positive 30 plus 1, positive 30 plus negative 1, that's positive 29. That doesn't work. If I do negative 15 plus 2, that's negative 13. Close. If I do positive 15 plus negative 2, that gets me 13. So my two numbers are going to be 15 and negative 2. All right, so now I need to split b into those two factors. So I'm going to go 3x squared. Instead of 13x, now I'm going to have plus 15x and minus 2x. All right, now I group first two, last two, factor out on each one of these, 3x squared and 15x. Well, 3 and 15, those share a 3. X squared and x share an x. So my greatest common factor of those two is 3x. If I divide them out, 3x squared divided by 3x, 3 divided by 3 is 1, and x squared divided by x is just x. 15x divided by 3x, 15 divided by 3 is 5, and x divided by x is 1, so it's gone. If I go over here and do the same thing on this binomial. Negative 2 and 10, those share negative 2. They don't share an x, so that's my greatest common factor. Negative 2x divided by negative 2 is x. Negative 10 divided by negative 2 is 5. All right, I know I'm doing this right because these are the same, x plus 5, x plus 5. So now I just rewrite it. First up, what's inside the parentheses, x plus 5, and then what's outside, 3x minus 2. And I was good to remember to have this 2 on it at the end. So 6x squared plus 26x minus 20 factors out to be 2 times x plus 5 times 3x minus 2. All right, last example we're going to do as a group here is we've got example 4, and we want to factor 3x squared plus 18x plus 2. So first step, greatest common factor, 3, 18, and 2. Those don't share anything. So now I want to multiply a times c. 3 times 2, that's 6. And next, I want to find two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 18. So if I think about this, 6. The only factors of 6 are 6 and 1 and 3 and 2. All right, 6 times 1, or 6 plus 1 is 7. That doesn't work. They could both be negative. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 7. That doesn't work. 3 plus 2 is 5. Nope. Negative 3 plus negative 2 is negative 5. That doesn't work either. So I can't find any two numbers to go here. So this cannot be factored. There's no way of factoring this, this trinomial. So what we want to do is we just want to say that this one is prime. All right? It cannot be factored. You just got to leave it like it is. So the answer is prime. So I'm going to leave you today with your try it problem. You need to factor 3x squared plus 4x minus 4.